A royal guard stands motionless at his post, his red uniform gleaming in the morning sun. 3 young men approach, laughing and filming. In seconds, a piece of food flies through the air. But what happens next will change their lives forever. Today's story is about respect, consequences, and an unexpected lesson that transformed a group of pranksters forever. The crisp autumn morning at Windsor Castle brought the usual crowd of tourists, their cameras clicking away at the historic landmark's towering walls and pristine grounds. Among them stood Marcus Thompson, better known to his growing social media, following as Mark, his perfectly styled hair and designer jacket, a stark contrast to the traditional solemnity of the castle grounds. "This is going to be epic," Mark whispered to his best friend Jack Bennett, who was already setting up their expensive camera equipment. Ryan Cooper, the newest member of their prank crew, shifted nervously beside them, his eyes darting between the Royal Guard and their surroundings. Sergeant William Mitchell stood at his post, his red uniform immaculate, his bearskin hat adding to his imposing presence. He'd served 15 years in active military duty before taking this position, though none of the tourists snapping photos knew that. To them, he was just another fixture of the castle, as permanent and unmoving as the stone walls themselves. "You sure about this?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, these guys are actual military." Mark rolled his eyes, adjusting his wireless microphone. "That's exactly why it'll go viral. Nobody's ever managed to get a reaction from these guys. We'll be the first." His last prank video had only gotten 50,000 views. Decent, but not the millions he craved. This would change everything. Jack finished setting up the secondary camera angles, hidden discreetly among the tourists. "Everything's ready. Remember, we need to build up to it. Start small, then hit him with the finale." The morning crowd had grown larger, creating the perfect audience for their performance. Mark could already imagine the video title, "Royal Guard Loses It Over Ultimate Prank." His followers would eat it up. What Mark didn't notice was how Sergeant Mitchell's eyes had caught every movement of their setup, how years of military training had taught him to spot potential threats while appearing completely still. He'd seen countless pranks attempted during his service, but something about these 3 felt different, more desperate, more determined. "All right," Mark announced, straightening his designer jacket. "Let's make some content." The tourists continued their photo taking, unaware they were about to become part of something much bigger than a simple prank. The autumn breeze carried fallen leaves across the courtyard, and somewhere in the distance, a clock tower struck 10. None of them knew that in the next few hours, everything would change. A lesson would be taught, respect would be earned, and a viral video would emerge. But not the one Mark Thompson had planned to make. As Mark positioned himself near Sergeant Mitchell's post, his mind wandered to the journey that had led him here. Just 18 months ago, he had been a regular college student, struggling to find his place in the world. Then he discovered the intoxicating world of social media fame. It started small, funny videos with friends, harmless pranks at the local mall, nothing too extreme. But as his following grew, so did his appetite for bigger reactions, more shocking content. Each notification, each new follower, fed something inside him that he didn't even know was hungry. Jack had been there from the beginning, his childhood best friend turned cameraman. They'd grown up together in the quiet suburbs of London, dreaming of becoming something more than their parents' ordinary lives. Jack's technical skills behind the camera complemented Mark's natural charisma in front of it. Together they'd built a modest following, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. "Remember our first viral video?" Jack asked as he adjusted the hidden camera near a tour group. "That old lady at the supermarket?" Mark grinned, remembering. how they'd staged an elaborate fall in front of her, making her think she'd witnessed a serious accident. Her panic had been real, her concern genuine. The video got 2 million views. Yeah, but this is different. This is going to be legendary. Ryan, their newest member, hadn't been around for those early days. They'd met him at a content creator meetup 3 months ago, impressed by his editing skills and eager to add fresh blood to their team. But Ryan came with something else, a conscience that hadn't yet been numbed by the pursuit of viral fame. "My girlfriend Emily saw our last prank," Ryan mentioned, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "She said we went too far with that homeless man." Mark's jaw tightened. The homeless man prank had been his idea, pretending to offer food to a homeless person only to reveal it was filled with hot sauce. The man's reaction had been genuine, painful, humiliating. The video got decent views, but the comments had been brutal. They'd lost subscribers for the first time. "People don't understand what it takes," Mark said, defensive. "You want to make it in this business, you have to push boundaries. Nobody remembers safe content." What Mark didn't say was how the negative comments had kept him up at night. How his sister Diana had refused to speak to him for weeks after seeing it. Diana, always the voice of reason, always trying to pull him back from the edge. "You're better than this," she'd said. But was he? Sergeant Mitchell stood perfectly still at his post. But his mind was active. 15 years in active service had taught him to read people, to sense intention. He'd seen the 3 young men setting up their cameras, recognized the familiar signs of another attempted prank. In his 2 years as a Royal Guard, he'd seen everything from tourists making faces to elaborate schemes, trying to make the guards break character. But there was something different about these 3. The leader, the one in the designer jacket, had that hungry look Mitchell had seen too often in young recruits, the need to prove something, to be somebody. The quiet one behind the main camera moved with purpose, confident in his role. But it was the third one that caught Mitchell's attention, the way he kept glancing around, the uncertainty in his movements. That one still had a chance. What none of them knew was that Mitchell had already spotted something else, a small detail that would change everything. The food they were planning to throw wasn't just any food. Through years of training, he'd noticed the distinct shape of the container, recognized the potential danger. These weren't just pranks for views anymore. This was something that could cause real harm. As tourists continued to mill about, taking photos and admiring the castle grounds, the tension built imperceptibly. Mark checked his phone one last time. His latest video had gained another 1,000 views, but the comments were becoming increasingly critical. Getting boring. Same old pranks. Try something original. The pressure was mounting. His parents had given him 6 months to make something of himself before insisting he return to college. 5 months had already passed. This video had to work. It had to go viral. Everything depended on it. Jack finished setting up the last camera angle and gave Mark a thumbs up. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, thinking about Emily's words from their last conversation. "There's a difference between being famous and being notorious," she'd said. The words echoed in his mind as he watched Mark prepare for their biggest prank yet. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the castle. Courtyard. A group of school children passed by on a field trip, their excited chatter filling the air. One little girl pointed at Sergeant Mitchell, asking her teacher if the guard was real or a statue. Mitchell remained motionless, but somewhere, deep inside, a memory stirred. His own daughter Sarah asking the same question on her first visit to the castle. Mark checked his reflection in his phone camera one last time, adjusting his carefully styled hair. The designer jacket had cost 3 months' worth of video revenue, but image was everything in this business. He'd learned that the hard way, watching other content creators pass him by, their success measured in millions of views, while he struggled to break 100,000. Remember, he whispered to his team, we need to build it up. Start with the silly faces, then the dancing, then the food. We need to show the progression for maximum impact. What Mark didn't realize was that his pursuit of viral fame had slowly eroded something inside him. The empathy that once made him stop and help an elderly neighbor with her groceries, the conscience that used to keep him awake at night after telling even a small lie, all sacrificed on the altar of social media success. Diana had tried to warn him. You're losing yourself, she'd said during their last real conversation. These pranks, they're not jokes anymore. They're just cruel. He dismissed her concerns, accused her of being jealous of his growing fame. But late at night, when the notifications stopped and the silence crept in, her words haunted him. Ryan checked his phone, seeing 3 missed calls from Emily. She'd been increasingly vocal about her disapproval of their pranks, especially after the homeless man incident. You're better than this, she'd said, echoing Diana's words. But Ryan wasn't sure anymore. The allure of instant fame, the rush of viral success, it was addictive.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sergeant Mitchell continued his stoic vigil, but his trained eyes hadn't missed a single detail of the unfolding scene. The hidden cameras, the nervous energy, the container of food that could cause real harm. It all painted a picture he'd seen too many times before. In his military days, he'd learned that the most dangerous moments often came disguised as harmless fun. A tour guide nearby was explaining the history of Windsor Castle to an attentive group, her voice carrying across the courtyard. These guards aren't just for show, she said. They're highly trained military personnel who've served their country with distinction. The irony of her words wasn't lost on Mitchell as he watched Mark and his team prepare their prank. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. In just a few moments, everything would change, but not in the way Mark Thompson had planned. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and Sergeant William Mitchell was about to become more than just another prop in someone's viral video. Mark gave the signal, and Operation Royal Reaction officially began. His heart raced with anticipation as Jack's main camera started rolling, the red light blinking steadily like a countdown to infamy. The morning crowd at Windsor Castle had reached its peak, the perfect audience for what he believed would be his masterpiece. Hey guys, it's your boy Mark here, he whispered into his lapel microphone, practicing the intro he'd rehearsed countless times. Today, we're about to do something that's never been done before. We're going to make one of these famous Royal Guards crack. The first phase of their plan started innocently enough. Mark positioned himself near Sergeant Mitchell, striking exaggerated poses for tourist photos. A few onlookers chuckled, phones raised to capture what they thought was harmless entertainment. Ryan, still struggling with his conscience, maintained his position with the second camera, focusing on catching reactions from the growing crowd. Look at him, standing there like a statue, Mark announced loudly, playing to his audience. I wonder if he's even real. He waved his hand in front of Mitchell's face, close enough to feel the guard's steady breath, but not close enough to technically constitute interference. Mitchell remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward, but years of military training had already assessed and catalogued every movement. Jack zoomed in on Mitchell's face, catching the perfect angle of Mark's increasingly bold gestures. The crowd had grown larger now, forming a semicircle around the unfolding scene. Parents pulled their children closer, some looking uncomfortable, others openly filming with their phones. Maybe he needs a little entertainment, Mark continued, his voice growing louder. He launched into an elaborate dance routine right in front of Mitchell, something he'd choreographed specifically for this video. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some laughed, others shook their heads in disapproval. A young mother nearby pulled her daughter away, whispering, "That's not respectful." The words carried to Ryan's microphone, and he felt a familiar twinge of shame. He thought about Emily again, imagining her disappointment if she could see him now. Mark, emboldened by the attention, moved to phase 2. He pulled out his phone and started a live stream, adding another layer of documentation to their prank. "What's up, everyone tuning in? We're about to make history here at Windsor Castle. Don't forget to share this stream." The comments started, flooding in immediately. "This is gonna be epic. Someone's gonna get arrested, son. Don't do it, bro. Security's gonna shut this down quick." But Mark was too far gone, too invested in his vision of viral success to stop now. He nodded to Jack, who reached into their equipment bag and pulled out the first food item, a soft croissant they'd purchased that morning. "Let's see if our friend here is hungry," Mark announced to his growing online audience. He unwrapped the croissant, slowly, theatrically, playing to both the live crowd and the cameras. "I heard these guys aren't allowed to eat on duty. Must be starving, right?" Sergeant Mitchell remained still, but his military training had kicked into high gear. He'd noticed the slight bulge in Mark's jacket pocket earlier. The container they'd tried to keep hidden. The croissant was just the beginning, he knew. Years of experience had taught him to spot the signs of escalating behavior. "Come on, just a little bite," Mark taunted, waving the croissant inches from Mitchell's face. The crowd's mood shifted noticeably. What had started as mild amusement was turning into visible discomfort. A few tourists walked away, shaking their heads. An elderly man in a veteran's cap stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Son, that's enough. Show some respect." But Mark was too focused on his performance to hear the warning in those words. "Respect?" Mark laughed, playing to his live stream audience. "It's just a joke, old man. Nobody gets hurt." He turned back to Mitchell, his voice taking on a more aggressive edge. "Besides, these guys are just decorations, right? Living mannequins for tourist photos." What Mark didn't know was that the elderly veteran wasn't just any tourist. Henry Wilson had served with Mitchell in Afghanistan, though he didn't recognize his old comrade in the ceremonial uniform. Wilson watched the scene unfold with growing concern, remembering the weight of the uniform he once wore, the responsibility it represented. Ryan's camera caught the subtle change in the atmosphere. The morning sun cast harsh shadows now, making everything feel more dramatic, more intense. He zoomed in on Mitchell's face, catching a momentary flicker in the guard's eyes. Not anger, but something deeper, more profound. Mark reached into his jacket pocket, fingers closing around the hidden container. This was it, the grand finale that would guarantee viral success. The special sauce they'd concocted was harmless, but would leave an impressive stain on the pristine red uniform. The video title flashed in his mind. "Royal Guard uniform ruined. Epic reaction." Jack gave him the signal. All cameras were in position. The live stream comments were flying by so fast they were barely readable. The crowd had grown, larger, drawn by the spectacle, creating the perfect backdrop for their viral moment. But just as Mark began to pull out the container, something unexpected happened. A young girl, no more than 8 years old, broke away from her mother and ran straight toward Mitchell. She stopped right beside Mark, looking up at the guard with wide, innocent eyes. "My daddy's a soldier too," she announced proudly. "He says the uniform means you promise to protect people, not hurt them." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. For a split second, his hand froze in his pocket. The girl's mother hurried forward to retrieve her, apologizing profusely, but the damage was done. The simple truth in the child's words had cracked something in Mark's carefully constructed performance. Ryan's camera caught it all. The girl's innocent intervention, Mark's moment of hesitation, and most importantly, the subtle change in Sergeant Mitchell's posture. It was barely noticeable, but years of military service had taught Mitchell to respond to the presence of children near his post. The crowd had fallen silent, the only sound the whir of cameras and the distant calls of birds. Mark's live stream comments had taken a turn. "This doesn't feel right anymore. That little girl just schooled you, bro. Maybe we should respect the uniform." But Mark had come too far to back down now. His fingers tightened around the container in his pocket. One viral moment, that's all he needed. One video to change everything. The pressure of 5 months of declining views, of his parents' deadline, of constant competition with other content creators, it all pushed him forward. "Nice try, kid," he said, his voice harder than he intended. "But this isn't about respect. This is about entertainment. This is about giving people what they want." He pulled out the container, its contents specially prepared to create maximum visual impact. The crowd gasped, sensing the escalation. Jack zoomed in, ready to capture the moment that would define their channel. The atmosphere at Windsor Castle shifted dramatically as Sergeant William Mitchell made his first subtle movement. It wasn't the theatrical reaction Mark had hoped to capture. Instead, it was something far more powerful. The guard's head turned ever so slightly, his eyes meeting Mark's with an intensity that made the young prankster take an involuntary step backward. "Mate, something's different," Jack whispered from behind his camera, noticing the change in Mitchell's stance. The usual rigid posture had transformed into something more purposeful, more commanding. The morning sun caught the medals on his chest, each one telling a story of service and sacrifice that Mark had never bothered to consider. "He's breaking protocol," Ryan muttered, his camera steady but his voice shaking. The crowd sensed it, too, their phones raised higher, knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The little girl who had spoken earlier clung to her mother's hand, her eyes wide with anticipation. Sergeant Mitchell's voice, when it finally came, wasn't the angry shout Mark had expected. Instead, it carried the quiet authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat zones, who had made decisions that meant the difference between life and death. "Before you throw that," Mitchell said, his eyes fixed on the container in Mark's, "and you should know exactly who you're disrespecting." The crowd fell absolutely silent. Mark's livestream comments exploded. "Did he just speak? This is insane. First time I've ever seen a guard break position. Something big is about to happen." Mark's hand trembled slightly, but his desire for viral fame pushed him forward. "That's what we wanted, isn't it? A reaction? Come on, guys, we're making history here." He tried to sound confident, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Mitchell took one step forward, then another, each movement precise and deliberate. His next words carried across the courtyard with commanding clarity. "2 days ago, I received a letter from a soldier in my old unit. He lost both legs protecting civilians from an IED. Do you know what he asked for?" Mark's mouth went dry. This wasn't the script he'd planned for. The container felt heavy in his hand. "He asked for a photo of this uniform," Mitchell continued, his voice steady, "because to him it represents everything he's sacrificed for, everything we stand for." The elderly veteran in the crowd, Henry Wilson, stepped forward again. "I know that soldier," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "James Parker, bravest man I ever served with." Mitchell's eyes flickered with recognition at Wilson's voice, but he remained focused on Mark. "This uniform," he gestured to his immaculate red jacket, "isn't a costume. Those aren't promotional medals. Each one was earned protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." Ryan's camera caught every word, every subtle expression. The crowd had grown larger, but now they stood in respectful silence, sensing they were witnessing something more significant than a prank. "You see entertainment," Mitchell continued, his gaze unwavering. "I see brothers and sisters who never came home. I see the promises we made to their families. I see the weight of tradition and duty that's been carried for generations. Mark's livestream had gone viral, but not for the reasons he'd planned. Comments poured in. This is powerful. Udu never felt more ashamed of laughing at guard pranks. Someone save this footage. People need to see this. The little girl who had spoken earlier tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mummy, he's like Daddy. He's a real hero. Her innocent words carried across the quiet courtyard, adding another layer of weight to the moment. Mitchell's next movement was unexpected. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a photograph, holding it carefully in his gloved hand. This is my daughter, Sarah, 8 years old. Every morning before I leave for duty, she helps me polish my boots, knows every medal, every commendation, wants to serve someday herself. Mark's hand lowered, the container of prepared food forgotten. The cameras were still rolling, but the performance he'd planned felt hollow now. She asks me why some people try to make us laugh or break position, Mitchell continued. I tell her it's because they don't understand. They see a uniform, but not the person wearing it. They see tradition, but not the sacrifice behind it. Jack lowered his camera slightly, the weight of Mitchell's words affecting him more than he'd expected. Ryan's footage captured the changing expressions in the crowd, from curiosity to understanding, from entertainment to respect. But today, Mitchell's voice took on a different tone. I'm breaking protocol, not for your video, not for entertainment, but because sometimes a lesson needs to be taught. Sometimes someone needs to speak for all those who stand silent at their posts, carrying the weight of duty and tradition. The sun had risen higher now, casting shorter shadows across the castle grounds. The morning air felt different, charged with something more significant than the promise of viral fame. So make your choice, Mitchell said, his voice carrying the weight of command. Throw what's in that container, create your viral moment, but know exactly what you're disrespecting, not just a uniform, not just a guard, but every person who's ever sacrificed for the principles we stand for. Mark's hand shook more visibly now. The container that had seemed so important moments, ego felt toxic in his grip. His carefully planned prank had transformed into something else entirely, a moment of choice that would define more than just his social media presence. The elderly veteran, Henry Wilson, spoke again, this time addressing the crowd. I served with men like him, he gestured to Mitchell. They stand guard not because it's a job, but because it's a calling. Each one carries stories you'll never hear, sacrifices you'll never know. Mitchell remained steady, his posture perfect, despite breaking protocol. Your followers can't see the weight of this uniform, he said quietly. They can't feel the responsibility it carries, but you can feel it now, can't you? Mark's livestream continued to explode with comments, but they were different now. This is what real content looks like. Never felt more ashamed of my guard prank videos. This needs to go viral for all the right reasons. The morning had started with a plan for entertainment, for viral fame, for pushing boundaries. But sometimes the most powerful moments come when plans fall apart, when reality breaks through the carefully constructed facades we build. And as Mark stood there, caught between his desire for views and the weight of understanding that was slowly crushing his performance, he realized that Sergeant William Mitchell had given him something far more valuable than a viral reaction. He had given him a choice, a moment to decide what kind of person he truly wanted to be. The container in Mark's hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The silence in the courtyard was deafening, broken only by the soft whir of cameras and the distant chime of the castle clock striking 11. The moment of decision had arrived, but not the one he'd planned for. Go on then, Sergeant Mitchell said, his voice carrying a challenge. Show everyone what you're really made of. The words weren't angry. but they cut deeper than any shout could have. The guard's eyes never wavered, holding Mark's gaze with an intensity that spoke of battlefields and brotherhood. Mark's fingers tightened around the container, his knuckles white. The live stream comments continued to flood in, but they seemed distant now, unimportant. His carefully constructed online persona was crumbling under the weight of real consequence. Mark started, but his voice cracked. The crowd pressed closer, phones raised, capturing every second of his hesitation. This wasn't the viral moment he'd imagined. This was something raw, real, and terrifyingly honest. Ryan's camera caught the subtle shift in Mark's expression, the moment when bravado began to crack. Jack, still filming from his position, noticed something else. Tears forming in the eyes of several veterans in the crowd, moved by Mitchell's words and presence. But Mark wasn't done. Pride and desperation fought against the growing weight of conscience. "It's just a prank," he said, his voice rising with a hint of defiance. "Everyone does them. What makes you so special?" Mitchell's response was measured, calm. "Nothing makes me special, that's exactly the point." He gestured to his uniform. "This isn't about me. It's about everything this represents, every person who's ever worn it, every sacrifice made wearing it." The elderly veteran, Henry Wilson, stepped forward again. "Son, I watched my best friend die wearing that uniform. He gave his life protecting a school in Afghanistan, never asked for recognition, never wanted fame, just did what was right." Mark's live stream viewers were witnessing something unprecedented. This is more real than any prank video. Don't do it, man. Listen to them. Some lessons are worth more than views. But Mark was trapped in the momentum of his own creation. Years of chasing views, of pushing boundaries, of measuring worth in likes and shares. It all pushed him toward the edge. His hand began to rise. The container tilted slightly. "You do this," Mitchell said quietly, "and you'll get your viral moment, but it won't be the one you're hoping for." The little girl who had spoken earlier suddenly broke free from her mother again, running to stand between Mark and Mitchell. "Please don't," she pleaded, her innocent voice cutting through the tension. "My daddy wears a uniform too." Mark's hand froze mid-motion. The container trembled visibly now. Ryan's camera caught the exact moment when conflicting emotions crossed. Mark's face, desire for fame, warring with the first real stirrings of shame. "Your father," Mitchell addressed the little girl while keeping his eyes on Mark. "He serves Royal Marines," she said proudly. "He says his uniform means he promised to protect people." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mark's livestream comments had taken on a different tone. This little girl is speaking truth. More wisdom from a kid than all these prank videos combined. Sometimes the best content isn't planned. Jack lowered his camera, slightly, his own conscience beginning to stir. "Mark," he called softly, "maybe we should..." "Shut up," Mark snapped, but his voice cracked again. The facade was crumbling faster now, years of built-up justifications falling away under the weight of real consequence. Mitchell's next words were quiet, meant only for Mark. "You came here looking for a reaction, but ask yourself, what kind of reaction do you really want? The kind that fades with the next viral video, or the kind that changes something real?" The sun had reached its peak, casting no shadows now. Everything was illuminated in harsh, unforgiving light. Mark's designer jacket felt too tight, too fake. The container in his hand might as well have been filled with all his choices, all his compromises. "Sometimes," Mitchell continued, "the bravest thing isn't making a scene. Sometimes it's admitting you were wrong." A woman in the crowd stepped forward. She wore a gold star pin that several veterans immediately recognized. "My son died wearing that uniform," she said, her voice steady despite the pain it carried. He stood guard right here just like this brave man, said it was the highest honor of his life. Mark's arm began to lower, the container no longer held like a weapon. His live stream had gone viral, but for reasons he never expected. This is what real courage looks like, more powerful than any prank could be. Sometimes the best content is just truth. Ryan's camera caught the moment Mark's expression changed, something genuine breaking through the practiced. Social media smile. The weight of real consequence, of true understanding settled on his shoulders. Mitchell stood unwavering, but his voice carried a new note, not judgment but opportunity. You came to make people watch. Now make them see something worth watching. The morning had started with a plan for entertainment, for viral fame, for pushing boundaries. But as Mark stood there, caught between who he'd been pretending to be and who he could choose to become, he realized that sometimes the most viral moments aren't the ones we plan. The moment of truth arrived, with the sound of plastic hitting pavement. Mark's hand had finally opened, letting the container fall untouched to the ground. The clatter seemed to echo across the silent courtyard, a sound that marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. Sergeant Mitchell's response was immediate but unexpected. Rather than return to his post, he took another step forward. His movement was deliberate, each step carrying the weight of years of military discipline. The crowd held their collective breath, phones still recording what had become something far more significant than a prank. "Pick it up," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had commanded troops in combat zones. It wasn't a request. It was an order, but one filled with purpose rather than punishment. Mark stood frozen, his carefully constructed persona shattered at his feet, along with the fallen container. The live stream comments continued to pour in, but they seemed distant now, like voices from another world. "This is intense. Never seen anything like this. More real than any prank video ever." I said, "Pick it up," Mitchell repeated, each word measured and clear. "Face the consequences of your choices." Mark's hands trembled as he bent down, aware of every camera trained on him, every eye watching. The container, meant to be his tool for viral fame, now felt like evidence of his shame. As he straightened up, Mitchell's next words struck deep. "Now open it. Show everyone exactly what you plan to do." The color drained from Mark's face. I can't." "You can't." Mitchell's voice carried a new edge. "You were brave. Enough to plan it, film it, promote it. Be brave enough to own it." With shaking hands, Mark opened the container. The crowd gasped as they saw its contents, a mixture specially designed to stain and damage the ceremonial uniform. The reality of what he'd planned to do hit him with full force. That uniform, the elderly veteran Henry Wilson spoke up again, costs more than just money. It costs dedication, sacrifice, years of service, but you were going to ruin it for what? A few minutes of entertainment? The little girl who had intervened earlier tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mummy, why would anyone want to hurt us soldiers? Uniform?" Her innocent question hung in the air, making Mark's planned prank seem even more shallow. Ryan's camera caught the moment Mark's eyes filled with tears, not performed, not for views, but real, genuine shame. Mitchell's next move surprised everyone. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out not just the photo of his daughter, but a folded piece of paper. "This arrived yesterday," he said, unfolding it carefully. "It's from a 12-year-old boy in Manchester. His father died wearing this uniform, serving his country. He asked if he could visit, see where his dad once stood guard." The paper trembled slightly in Mitchell's gloved hands, the only sign that the story affected him personally. "He's coming next week. Imagine if he found this post stained, disrespected, turned into a joke for social media entertainment." Mark's legs felt weak. The designer jacket that had felt so important this morning now seemed to weigh him down with its artificiality. Everything he'd built his online persona around, the pranks, the shocking content, the desperate chase for views, suddenly felt hollow. "But you can still make a choice," Mitchell continued, his voice softening slightly. "Right here, right now, you can decide who you really want to be." The live stream comments had taken on a different tone. "This is what real content looks like. More powerful than any prank. Sometimes the best lessons come from our worst moments." Jack had lowered his main camera, but Ryan kept filming, capturing what had become something far more meaningful than their planned video. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, but nothing could hide the truth of this moment. Mark's voice cracked. "I didn't think about it like that. I never thought." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Mitchell's words carried no judgment, only understanding. We stop thinking about the real people behind our actions. We forget that every uniform, every position, every tradition carries real meaning for someone. The Gold Star mother who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. "My son," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He would stand here for hours, proud to wear this uniform. He'd tell me stories about the tourists, the children who'd wave, the veterans who'd salute. He never saw it as just a job." Mark looked down at the container in his hands, then at his phone, still live streaming, then back at Mitchell. The guard's eyes held his gaze, not with anger, but with something more powerful, the opportunity for redemption. "Your followers are watching," Mitchell said quietly. "Show them something worth seeing." The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. Mark's carefully constructed world of viral fame and shocking content balanced against something real, something true. His phone continued to record, but the performance was over. What remained was just a young man facing the consequences of his choices. "I'm sorry," Mark finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, then louder, turning to face his live stream camera directly. "I'm sorry. This was wrong. All of it was wrong." The comments exploded. "Most real thing I've ever seen on social media. This is what growth looks like. Now this is content worth sharing." Mitchell's next words carried the weight of years of leadership. "Sorry is a start, but words are easy. Actions matter more." "Tell me what to do," Mark said, and for the first time that morning, his voice carried no trace of performance. "Please, I want to make this right." The guard's response was immediate and clear. "First, in this live stream, some lessons shouldn't be about views." Without hesitation, Mark turned off his phone's camera. The audience of thousands disappeared, leaving just the real people in the courtyard, witnesses to something far more powerful than any viral video. "Now," Mitchell continued, "you're going to learn about what this uniform really means. About the people who wear it, the sacrifices they make, the traditions they uphold." The sun had reached its peak in the sky, casting no shadows now. Everything was illuminated in clear, unforgiving light. But sometimes that's exactly what we need to see the truth. The silence in the Windsor Castle courtyard was broken by the sound of boots on stone. Sergeant Mitchell turned to address the crowd, his bearing still military precise despite breaking protocol. "What you don't know," Mitchell began, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard, "is that we've been watching you for weeks." His eyes fixed on Mark, whose face registered shock. "Every prank video, every attempt to provoke reactions, we saw them all." Mark's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" Mitchell's next revelation stunned everyone present. "Your latest video, the one with the homeless man, I was there off duty. I watched you set it up, film it, laugh about it afterward, but I also saw something else." Ryan's camera captured the exact moment understanding dawned on Mark's face. The homeless man prank, the one that had cost them subscribers, but still got decent views. The one that had made Emily stop speaking to Ryan, the one that had pushed Diana away. After you left, Mitchell continued, I stayed, talked to that man, found out his story. He pulled out another photograph from his breast pocket. His name is James Harrison, Royal Marines, served 2 tours in Iraq, lost everything to PTSD. The impact of this revelation hit Mark like a physical blow. His legs weakened, and he had to step back to steady himself. The container of prepared food, still in his hands, felt even heavier now. No, Mark whispered, that's not. We didn't know. Exactly. Mitchell's voice carried no accusation, only truth. You didn't know. Just like you didn't know about this uniform, about what it represents, about the people who wear it. The elderly veteran, Henry Wilson, stepped forward again. William, he said, addressing Mitchell by his first name, surprising everyone. Tell them the rest. Mitchell's expression shifted slightly, the first real crack in his professional demeanor. Henry and I served together, he revealed. Afghanistan, 2010. The same unit where James Harrison earned his medals before PTSD took everything from him. The crowd murmured, the connection between past and present becoming clear. Mark's live stream might have ended, but Ryan's camera continued recording, capturing a moment of truth more powerful than any planned content. Your prank videos, Mitchell continued. They're not just about uniforms or guards or homeless men. They're about real people, real lives, real consequences. James Harrison watched your video, saw himself become a joke for social media entertainment. Mark's face had lost all color. The designer jacket felt suffocating now, a costume he no longer deserved to wear. Where is he? He managed to ask. Mr. Harrison, where is he now? Mitchell's answer carried hope instead of condemnation. He's getting help. That day, after your video, Henry and I reached out to our old unit, got him connected with veteran services. He's in treatment now, working to rebuild his life. The Gold Star mother who had spoken earlier wiped tears from her eyes. My son, she said softly, he knew soldiers like James, said they were the bravest men he'd ever met, fighting battles most people couldn't see. Mark's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the container again. Jack had completely lowered his camera now, his own face reflecting the shame they all felt. Ryan's footage captured the transformation happening in real time, the moment when entertainment became understanding. But here's what you really need to know, Mitchell continued, his voice taking on a different tone. James Harrison watched your latest videos too, the ones where you mock authority, disrespect uniforms, treat everything as a joke for views. And yesterday, he wrote me a letter. Mitchell pulled out one final piece of paper from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. He asked me to give you a message if you ever showed up here. Would you like to hear it? Mark nodded, unable to speak. The crowd leaned in, phones lowered, understanding they were witnessing something far more significant than a prank gone wrong. Tell them, Mitchell read from the letter, that uniforms aren't costumes, traditions aren't jokes, and people aren't props for their entertainment. But also tell them it's not too late to change. I should know, I'm proof of that. The words hung in the morning air, heavy with meaning. The little girl who had intervened earlier spoke up again, her innocent voice cutting through the tension. Is Mr. James going to be okay? Mitchell smiled, the first real smile he'd shown that morning. Yes, sweetheart. Thanks to people who saw him as a person, not a prank opportunity. He's finding his way back. Mark's next words came out broken, genuine. Can I meet him? Not for content, not for videos, just to apologize, to learn. The transformation in Mitchell's expression was subtle but significant. That, he said quietly, is the first right question you've asked all morning. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the raw honesty of the moment. Phones remained lowered. Some things deserved to be experienced rather than recorded. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, but nothing could hide the truth. Being revealed. Mark sat alone on a bench near Windsor Castle's outer walls, his designer jacket discarded beside him. The container that had nearly ruined everything lay empty in a nearby bin, its contents properly disposed of under Sergeant Mitchell's supervision. The morning's events played on repeat in his mind, each memory bringing fresh waves of shame and revelation. Ryan's camera was still rolling, but from a respectful distance now. He'd been instructed by Mitchell to continue documenting, not for entertainment, but for accountability. Jack sat next to the camera equipment, his head in his hands, processing his own role in their journey to this moment. "Your phone's been buzzing," Ryan said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "Emily's been trying to reach me too." Mark pulled out his phone, seeing dozens of missed calls from his sister Diana, hundreds of notifications from followers demanding to know why the live stream had ended. One message stood out, a text from his father. "We need to talk. I saw the stream." His fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. How could he explain what had happened? How could he make anyone understand the transformation taking place inside him? The carefully constructed online persona of Mark the Prankster was crumbling, revealing the scared, uncertain person beneath. Sergeant Mitchell approached, his footsteps deliberately heavy to announce his presence. He'd returned to his post briefly to follow protocol, but his commanding officer had given him special permission to handle this situation. The gravity of the morning's revelations warranted breaking with tradition. "Your hands are still shaking," Mitchell observed, taking a seat next to Mark. "That's good. It means you're feeling something real." Mark looked down at his trembling fingers. "I can't stop thinking about him. James Harrison. All those comments on the video. People laughing. I made them laugh at a war hero." "Guilt can be productive," Mitchell said, his voice carrying years of leadership experience, "but only if you channel it into change. Tell me what's really going through your mind right now." The question broke something open inside Mark. Words began pouring out, unfiltered and raw. "Everything I've built, everything I thought I was working toward, it all feels hollow now. The views, the likes, the followers, what does it matter if this is what it takes to get them?" Ryan's camera captured the vulnerability in Mark's voice, the genuine struggle playing across his face. This wasn't performance anymore. This was pure, uncomfortable truth. "I keep thinking about my first video," Mark continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was just me and Jack, making people laugh with harmless jokes. When did it become about hurting people? When did I stop seeing them as people?" Mitchell listened silently, letting Mark work through his thoughts. The morning crowd had thinned, giving them a moment of relative privacy in the public space. "The homeless man prank was my idea," Mark admitted, tears forming in his eyes. "Jack said maybe we should reconsider, but I pushed for it. Said we needed something shocking to boost our numbers. I didn't want to think about who he might be." The elderly veteran, Henry Wilson, had remained nearby. He approached now, sitting on Mark's other side. "Fear makes us do strange things," he said quietly. "Fear of being forgotten, of being invisible. I've seen it in war, seen it change good men, but I've also seen those same men find their way back." Mark turned to him, confused. "Fear? I wasn't afraid, I was just... weren't you?" Henry's eyes held wisdom earned through hard experience. Every prank bigger than the last, every shock value pushed further, always chasing more views, more reactions. "What were you running from, son?" The question hit Mark like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind. His father's disappointment when he dropped out of university, Diana's growing distance, the constant pressure to create more extreme content, the gnawing emptiness each viral video left behind. Mitchell's voice cut through his thoughts. James Harrison wrote something else in his letter, something I didn't read earlier. Would you like to hear it? Mark nodded, unable to trust his voice. When I watch their videos, Mitchell read from the letter, I recognize something in the young man's eyes. The same desperation I used to feel, trying to prove I was still somebody after everything fell apart. Tell him it doesn't work. Tell him I tried that path. Ryan's camera caught the exact moment Mark's facade completely crumbled. The tears came freely now, years of suppressed emotion breaking through. I don't know who I am without the views, Mark confessed, his voice breaking. Without the likes, the followers, who am I supposed to be? That, Mitchell said firmly, is the second right question you've asked today. Jack approached cautiously, camera equipment packed away. Mark, he said hesitantly, Emily just sent me the comments from our old videos. People are going through them, connecting dots. They found James's story. It's spreading. Mark's breathing quickened, panic rising. Everything's falling apart. My whole channel, my following. No, Mitchell corrected. Everything's falling into place. Sometimes we need to break before we can rebuild properly. The little girl from earlier appeared again with her mother, holding something in her small hands. She approached Mark shyly, holding out a small military medallion. My daddy gave me this, she said solemnly. He says it reminds him to be brave even when he's scared. Maybe you need it more right now. Mark stared at the medallion, overwhelmed by the innocent gesture. I can't take this, he whispered. Just hold it, the girl insisted, until you remember how to be brave for real, not just for videos. Mitchell watched the interaction with approval. Real courage, he said quietly, isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing despite that fear. Mark closed his fingers around the medallion, its weight somehow both comforting and challenging. How do I fix this? He asked, looking between Mitchell and Henry. How do I make this right? You start, Henry said gently, by stopping. Stop performing. Stop chasing views. Stop trying to be somebody else's idea of entertainment. And then, Mark's voice was small, uncertain. Then, Mitchell said, standing up, you learn who you really are. Without the cameras, without the likes, without the constant need for attention. Are you ready for that? Mark looked down at his phone, still buzzing with notifications. With trembling fingers, he turned it off completely. The first time in years, he disconnected voluntarily. I think, he said slowly, I need to talk to my sister. And then, I need to meet James Harrison, not for content, not for views, just to understand. Mitchell nodded approvingly. Now you're asking the right questions, but understanding comes with responsibility. Are you prepared for that? The evening sun cast long shadows across Diana Thompson's small London apartment as she opened the door to find her brother standing there, looking more vulnerable than she'd seen him in years. Mark's designer jacket was gone, his carefully styled hair disheveled, and his eyes red from what appeared to be hours of crying. I saw the live stream, Diana said softly, stepping aside to let him in. At least the beginning of it. The apartment was modest but warm. Photos of their family from happier times decorating the walls. Each image showed a different Mark, before the pranks, before the desperate chase for fame. Die, Mark's voice cracked. I don't even know where to start. Her living room felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of the morning at Windsor Castle. Ryan had offered to keep filming, to document Mark's journey of redemption, but Mark had declined. Some conversations needed to happen off-camera. You could start, Diana suggested, settling onto her worn but comfortable couch, by telling me what happened after you ended the stream. The whole internet's talking about it. Mark sank into an armchair, the military medallion the little girl had given him still clutched in his hand. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought was important. He struggled to find the words. Diana waited patiently. As a marketing professional, she understood the allure of social media fame, the intoxicating pull of viral success. She'd watched her brother fall deeper into it, helpless to stop his descent. "Did you know," Mark finally continued, "that the homeless man in our video was a war veteran? Royal Marines, 2 tours in Iraq." His voice shook with emotion. Diana's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Mark. His name is James Harrison." Mark pressed on, the words tumbling out now. "He has PTSD, everything he went through, everything he sacrificed, and I made him a joke for views." The weight of his actions hung heavy in the room. Outside, the city continued its evening bustle, unaware of the transformation taking place in this small apartment. The guard at Windsor Castle, Sergeant Mitchell, he knew him, had served with him. Mark looked up at his sister, tears forming. "Again, they've been helping him get treatment, and all this time I've been making more videos, planning more pranks, thinking I was building something meaningful." Diana moved to sit beside her brother, taking his trembling hands in hers. "You know what Dad always says about building things?" Mark nodded, remembering their father's favorite saying, "The foundation matters more than the facade." "Your whole channel," Diana said gently. "It was all facade, wasn't it? The pranks getting bigger, the stunts more extreme. You were building higher and higher, but the foundation was rotten," Mark finished, "built on hurting people for entertainment." A notification sound broke the moment. Emily, Ryan's girlfriend, was calling. Diana reached for Mark's phone, but he shook his head. "I need to focus on this," he said, "on fixing what I broke, not just with James Harrison, but with everyone, with you." Diana squeezed his hand. "You haven't lost me, Mark. I just couldn't watch you lose yourself." The medallion in Mark's other hand caught the evening light. "This little girl at the castle," he explained, seeing Diana's questioning look. "She gave it to me. Said her Dad told her it was for being brave when you're scared." "Are you?" Diana asked softly. "Scared?" Mark's laugh was hollow. "Terrified. Everything I built, my whole identity online. It's all falling apart, but maybe," he looked down at the medallion, "maybe that's not the worst thing." A knock at the door startled them both. Diana opened it to find Jack standing there, looking as haunted as Mark. "Sorry," he said, hovering in the doorway, "but you need to see this." He held out his phone, open to their channel's latest comments. The transformation was stark. Their previous videos, once filled with laughing emojis and praise for their extreme pranks, were now flooded with different responses. "Can't believe we laughed at this. That homeless man was a war hero. Time to be better than this." Mark read through them, each comment hitting like a physical blow. "It's all coming apart," he whispered. "No," Diana corrected. "It's coming together. The truth always does." Jack stepped fully into the apartment, closing the door behind him. "Ryan's been talking to Emily, she thinks. She thinks we should tell James Harrison's whole story. Not for views, not for content, just so people understand." Mark looked up sharply. "We can't exploit him again. No more videos, no more—" "Not like that," Jack interrupted. "Emily's father. He works with veteran support groups. They've been trying to raise awareness about PTSD, about how society treats veterans. Maybe there's a way to use our platform for something real." Diana watched her brother carefully, seeing the conflict play across his face. "Mark," she said gently, "remember when you first started making videos? What was it really about?" Mark closed his eyes, remembering. "I wanted to make people happy, to create something meaningful." "So maybe," Diana suggested, "it's not about tearing everything down. Maybe it's about rebuilding on a better foundation." The medallion felt warmer in Mark's hand now, as if responding to the possibility of redemption. Sergeant Mitchell said something similar, about how understanding comes with responsibility. Jack sat down heavily in the armchair Mark had vacated. I keep thinking about all the pranks we filmed, all the people we might have hurt without knowing their stories. Then maybe, Diana said firmly, it's time to start listening to those stories. The evening had deepened outside, but inside Diana's apartment, something was becoming clearer. The path forward wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it into something meaningful. Mark stood up suddenly. "I need to call Dad," he announced. He saw the live stream too, and then he took a deep breath. "Then I need to write a letter to James Harrison." Diana smiled encouragingly. "One step at a time, little brother. The foundation first, remember?" The military medallion caught the light again as Mark turned it over in his hands. "The little girl at the castle," he said thoughtfully. "She saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. The possibility of being better." The Veteran Support Centre was housed in a modest building on the outskirts of London, its brick facade weathered but well-maintained. Mark stood at the entrance, the military medallion now a familiar weight in his pocket. 1 week had passed since the incident at Windsor Castle, but the ripples of that morning continued to spread. "Are you ready for this?" Emily asked softly. She had agreed to accompany Mark, her father's connection to the veteran community helping to arrange this meeting. Ryan stood nearby, a small camera in hand, not for content but at James Harrison's specific request. "He wants this documented," Emily had explained. "Says other veterans might need to hear it." Mark took a deep breath, adjusting his simple button-down shirt, so different from his usual flashy attire. "No," he admitted honestly, "but that's probably the point." The past week had been a whirlwind of consequences and revelations. His social media accounts had exploded with both support and criticism. Old videos had been scrutinized, past pranks dissected. Some followers had abandoned him, others had praised his honesty. But for the first time in years, Mark hadn't checked his view counts or engagement rates. Inside, the center was quiet, but not empty. Veterans of various ages moved through the space, some in group therapy sessions, others simply finding comfort in shared understanding. Mark felt every eye on him. They all knew who he was, why he was here. James Harrison sat in a small meeting room, his military bearing still evident despite his civilian clothes. The man Mark had once filmed for laughs, had mocked for views, now sat before him with dignity and presence that made Mark's shame burn deeper. "Sit down, son," James said, his voice steady. "We have a lot to talk about." Mark sank into the chair opposite him, acutely aware of Ryan's camera in the corner, capturing this moment of truth. But this wasn't about content anymore. This was about responsibility. "I've been watching your journey," James began, his eyes holding Mark's gaze. "Sergeant Mitchell keeps me updated. Says you're struggling with who you are now that the pranks are done." Mark nodded, unable to find words immediately. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. "Do you know what PTSD feels like?" James asked suddenly. "It's like living in two worlds at once. The person you were, the person you are, and this vast gulf between them that seems impossible to cross." Emily's father, Dr. Cooper, sat quietly in the corner, observing. He had been James's therapist for months, helping him navigate the trauma that Mark's viral video had inadvertently exposed to the world. "I never meant," Mark started, but James held up a hand. "Intentions don't erase impact," he said firmly. "But that's not why I asked you here." He reached into a folder beside him and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are letters from veterans who saw your Windsor Castle livestream, who recognized themselves in my story. They want you to understand something." Mark took the letters with trembling hands. Each one told a story of struggle, of dignity in the face of public misunderstanding, of the invisible battles fought long after the uniform comes off. "Your prank videos," James continued, "they're not just about getting laughs. They're about power, making yourself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. I know because I've been there, trying to feel strong when everything inside feels broken." The room fell silent, except for the soft whir of Ryan's camera. Through the window, afternoon sunlight cast patterns on the floor, a reminder of the world continuing outside this moment of truth. "But here's what you need to understand." James leaned forward, his voice intense. "Real strength isn't about power over others. It's about power over yourself, the strength to face your mistakes, to rebuild, to choose a different path." Mark thought about the medallion in his pocket, the little girl's words about being brave. "I don't know how," he admitted. "Everything I built, everything I thought I was a costume," James finished. "Just like I used to think my uniform was what made me strong. But real strength." He gestured to the therapy room next door, where veterans supported each other through their darkest moments. Real strength is about vulnerability, about admitting when you're lost and accepting help to find your way back. Emily stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. "That's why we're all here," she said softly. "Not to tear you down, but to help you rebuild." James nodded approvingly. "Your platform, your influence, it doesn't have to be about pranks and humiliation. It could be about understanding, about bridging gaps, about showing people the humanity they miss when they're too busy looking for entertainment." Mark looked down at the letters in his hands, each one a testament to the real lives affected by his choices. "I want to make it right," he said, his voice stronger now. "Not for views, not for redemption, but because it's right." "Then start here," James said, pulling out one final document. "We're launching a new program at the center, using social media to share veterans' stories, to help people understand the battles that don't end when the war does. We need someone who understands both worlds, the power of social media and the importance of using it responsibly." The opportunity hung in the air, a chance for genuine transformation. Mark looked at Ryan's camera, remembering how differently they had used it just a week ago. "It won't be easy," James warned. "You'll have to face every person you've pranked, understand every story you've mocked for entertainment. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" Mark thought about Sergeant Mitchell's words at Windsor Castle, about the foundation of real strength. He thought about Diana's support, about the little girl's faith in his capacity for change. "No," he admitted honestly, "I'm not ready, but I want to be. I need to be." James smiled, the first real smile since the meeting began. "Good answer, because readiness isn't about feeling prepared. It's about being willing to do the work anyway." The afternoon light had shifted, casting different shadows now. Outside the center, London continued its busy pace, unaware of the transformation taking place within these walls. But sometimes, the biggest changes happen in the quietest moments, in small rooms where truth meets responsibility. 3 months after the Windsor Castle incident, Mark stood in front of a different kind of audience. The Veteran Support Center's main hall was filled with people. Veterans, families, social media influencers, and journalists. But this time, he wasn't there for views or viral fame. "My name is Mark Thompson," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "And 3 months ago, I thought I knew everything about creating content. I was wrong about everything that mattered." The military medallion, now a permanent fixture, in his pocket, provided familiar comfort as he shared his journey. James Harrison sat in the front row alongside Sergeant Mitchell, who had taken personal leave to attend. The transformation in Mark was evident. Gone were the designer clothes, and carefully crafted persona replaced by authentic presence. We're here today, Mark continued, to launch Behind the Uniform, a platform dedicated to sharing veteran stories, not for entertainment, but for understanding. Ryan operated the presentation equipment, no longer filming pranks, but documenting important moments of healing and connection. Jack sat nearby, managing the technical aspects of their new project. Both had undergone their own transformations, finding purpose in using their skills for meaningful content. This isn't about redemption, Mark explained to the audience. It's about responsibility, about understanding the power of social media and using it to bridge gaps instead of creating them for laughs. The presentation screen behind him showed their new website, a professional platform where veterans could share their experiences safely, where the public could learn about the real people behind the uniforms, where understanding could replace entertainment. Diana watched from the sidelines, proud tears in her eyes. She had helped develop the marketing strategy for the new platform, ensuring it reached the right audiences for the right reasons. Emily stood beside her, having become an integral part of their team through her father's connections and her own commitment to the cause. 3 months ago, Mark shared, his voice carrying emotion, a little girl gave me this medallion. He pulled it from his pocket, letting it catch the light. She said it was for being brave when you're scared. I didn't understand real bravery then, but thanks to the veterans who shared their stories with me, who trusted me despite my mistakes, I'm learning the transformation hadn't been easy. The first month had been the hardest, facing the backlash from former followers, dealing with other pranksters who accused him of selling out, confronting the real impact of his past videos. But with each veteran's story he heard, with each family he met, the path forward became clearer. James Harrison stepped up to join Mark at the podium, their unlikely friendship now a testament to the possibility of change. When Mark first approached me about this project, James said, I was skeptical. But he showed up every day, not for content, not for views, but to listen and learn. The platform they were launching was more than just a website. It was a commitment to responsible social media use, to understanding the real people behind viral moments, to using influence for positive change. We've already collected over 100 stories, Mark explained, each one teaching us something about strength, about resilience, about the battles that don't end when the uniform comes off. The audience watched as they demonstrated the platform's features, carefully designed spaces for veterans to share their experiences, resources for support, educational content about military service and its lasting impact. Everything they had learned about viral content was now being used to spread understanding instead of entertainment. Sergeant Mitchell stood to share his perspective. 3 months ago, I broke protocol to teach a lesson, he said, his military. Bearing still impeccable. Today, I'm proud to say that lesson has grown into something far more important than any of us anticipated. The transformation wasn't just in their content, it was in their understanding of influence itself. Mark had learned that real impact wasn't measured in views or likes, but in lives touched and perspectives changed. Every veteran's story matters, Mark concluded, his voice strong with conviction. Every uniform carries weight beyond what we see. Our job now is to help others understand that, to use our platform for connection instead of division. The applause that followed wasn't the viral rush he used to chase, but it carried something more meaningful, genuine appreciation for real change. After the presentation, as people mingled and explored the new platform, the little girl from Windsor Castle appeared with her mother. She had been specially invited after they managed to track her down through Sergeant Mitchell's connections. You kept my daddy's medallion, she said, beaming up at Mark. It helped me find my way, Mark replied, kneeling to her level. Thank you for believing I could be better. The transformation had rippled beyond their immediate circle. Other social media influencers had reached out, wanting to learn about responsible content creation. Veterans from across the country had contacted them, ready to share their stories. Diana approached her brother as the event wound down. "Dad would be proud," she said softly. "You've built something real this time." Mark smiled, feeling the weight of the medallion in his pocket. "The foundation matters more than the facade," he quoted their father's wisdom. "Took me long enough to learn that." Emily and Ryan joined them, hand in hand. "The platform's already getting attention," Emily reported, "but the right kind this time." "It's just the beginning," Mark said, watching James interact with other veterans across the room. "We have so many more stories to tell, so much more to learn." The sun was setting outside, casting warm light through the hall's windows. Mark thought about how different this light felt compared to that morning at Windsor Castle. No longer harsh and exposing, but illuminating a path forward. "Ready for the real work to begin?" James asked, joining their group. Mark touched the medallion in his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. "Ready to keep learning," he answered honestly. "Ready to keep building something that matters." 1 year after the Windsor Castle incident, Mark stood once again in the castle courtyard. The morning sun felt different now, not a spotlight for pranks, but a witness to transformation. Sergeant Mitchell was at his post, but today's visit had been formally arranged. "It feels strange being back here," Mark said to Diana, who stood beside him. The military medallion, now worn smooth from constant handling, rested in his pocket. They were there for a special ceremony. Behind the uniform had grown beyond their wildest expectations, reaching millions with veterans' stories and creating real change in how social media influenced public understanding of service members. Sergeant Mitchell was being honored for his role in transforming a potential incident into a moment of lasting change. The little girl who had given Mark her father's medallion was there too, now understanding the full impact of her simple act of faith. James Harrison stood with them, no longer a victim of a thoughtless prank, but a partner in their mission. The platform they'd built together had helped hundreds of veterans share their stories, creating bridges of understanding where walls of entertainment once stood. "Sometimes," James said quietly, "the best things in life come from our worst moments." Mark nodded, watching as tourists passed by, some recognizing him not as the prankster he once was, but as the face of responsible social media influence. The transformation had been complete, not just in his actions, but in his understanding of what truly mattered. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. Afterward, Mark approached Sergeant Mitchell's post, this time with respect and purpose. The guard broke protocol once more, not in response to a prank, but to shake the hand of someone who had learned to use his influence for good. "Thank you," Mark said simply, "for seeing who I could be instead of who I was." The morning sun continued its journey across the Windsor Castle courtyard, illuminating not just the ancient stones, but the endless possibilities that come when we choose to build something real, something meaningful, something that truly matters. If this story touched your heart, remember to subscribe for more powerful stories of transformation and redemption. And don't forget, sometimes our greatest moments come not from chasing views, but from finding our true purpose. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that will move and inspire you. Just click to continue your journey of discovery. Thank you for being part of this story of change, responsibility, and the power of real influence. Remember to like, subscribe, and share if this story touched you. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter. Don't miss our next powerful story. Hit that notification bell now